Hello, hello. It is truly a pleasure to be here. We have 5 amazing panelists today, and I'll start by letting them introduce themselves. If we want to start at the far end, just let us know your name, company, your role, and give us a little bit of an idea of where you are in your AI journey right now. Are you experimenting with it, seeing some real progress and solutions? Is there a specific area you're leaning into AI?
Awesome. I will start. Thank you so much for being here, everyone. I'm Courtney McMahon. I work at Colgate-Palmolive. I'm the head of People Analytics, and I've been there about 5 years. Was in another company before also doing People Analytics, and then another company before that doing People Analytics, but guess what? We didn't call it People Analytics yet at that time. So I've been on this journey for a while. And obviously AI has to be part of a People Analytics lens, figuring out how we can use it to scale analytics, but we'll talk more about that in a bit. And where we are in our journey, I would say at Colgate is, I would say pretty far along with really encouraging all of our employees to be using the tools that we've provided. We have given all of our employees access to Gemini. We're a Google shop. So Gemini right now is the hot thing, and we're talking about it on a company-wide chat every day. There's a ton of chatter on how are we leveraging this, what's working well, what's not working well, so learning from each other no matter what function you're in. So this is not just HR. So that's where we are in our journey so far.
Great.
Hi everyone, I'm Anita, Jivani. I work at Avanade. I lead the innovation function. Avanade is an Accenture-Microsoft joint venture, and we are looking from a consulting and technology lens at the entire C-suite. So we're looking at how AI is impacting the marketing organization from a customer and employee experience perspective, the HR group, operations, CFO, et cetera. And so it's been a really great journey. In parallel, been doing that exercise internally. So also, I think pretty far along, but AI in general is in its infancy. So I can't say we're very, very far along, but we're trudging along.
Yeah. Great. Hi, everyone. I'm Annalyn Jacob. I lead People Analytics as well as org design at IPG Media Brands. We're part of the IPG holding company, which is a marketing organization, and we're responsible for a lot of the media investment for many of our clients. To answer the question around where we are in our journey, I will actually say it's a little bit mixed, because when you look at our organization as a whole, there are parts of it, particularly on the business side, where there's a lot of progress and advancement of using AI for a lot of client work. But then in other functions, it's not as moving as quickly, particularly because there is a little bit of fear and concern in there. We'll get into that as well. So for us, it's a mix. Some parts it's accelerated, some parts we've kind of pumped the brakes a little bit.
Hey everyone, Omar Praden. I'm a consultant at WorkHuman. I've been at WorkHuman for 6 years. And in my role, I get to talk to executives, customers, as well as future customers that are considering us. We provide a recognition solution, and increasingly we're baking in AI into that product. And so excited to share more about that in just a bit.
Hi, I'm Catherine Woodhill. I am VP of Marketing for CoderPad. So we help companies to assess technical talent and to really help with hiring the very, very best engineers. And so with that, I'd say we're pretty far along in our AI journey. It's embedded in our product. One of our biggest customers is OpenAI, and with that, they're also embedded into our product, and we can see how engineers are using AI in their day-to-day coding as part of that assessment. And I would say that we see customers kind of everywhere along the journey. So people who see AI as cheating, regardless of where it is used and how it is used, and they don't let their engineers actually use any LLMs in their day-to-day, all the way to really advanced AI companies who are using us, and using AI kind of in everything that they do. And so with that, we have adopted it in all of our business practices where appropriate.
Great. Yeah, a few of you already mentioned the tools, AI tools that you're using, and that's a major aspect of this, right? Platforms like LinkedIn are, of course, creating all kinds of tools for HR and talent acquisition professionals. Some organizations are building out their own tools. So I'd love to hear what AI tools you're using, building, finding helpful in your work. Omar, I believe you're working on an interesting tool of your own at WorkHumans. Maybe you could start telling us about that.
You got it, Sage. So yeah, maybe I'll start with the first part of it, which is, what tools do I use? I'd say probably all the usual suspects with Copilot. We use that internally at WorkHuman for all our Microsoft Suite tools, and Perplexity, LinkedIn Navigator has a number of AI tools that are quite good. Talent Insights also leverages AI within LinkedIn. And coming to some of the tools that we're building at WorkHuman, we definitely see that there's this treasure trove of information every time somebody recognizes a colleague, and you set that experience up the right way with putting pauses into the nomination process to ensure that it's not a simple, hey, great job, and a badge, right? That's a really big opportunity to get people to think about, hey, what was the impact? What was the specificity around the behaviors that were observed in that moment? And if we can slow people down in that nomination process to capture that, AI can be used on the back end to mine that for mentors, talent that might be ready for a new role within the company, all sorts of really creative use cases that are coming up and coming out of that investment. And we've also been using AI probably now for 5 years with a large language model we created around bias detection in the nomination process. So being able to micro-coach in the moment of a nomination to keep people from using gendered language like she's a great role model for all women, right? Why not just a great role model in general? Or, hey, you work nights and weekends, catching that and underlining it in your nomination to say, hey, that's not necessarily good work-life balance. Let's maybe consider different language there. So that's something we call inclusion advisor, and we're trying to incorporate that into the nomination process to make sure that the messages are well received. But this whole slowing people down to capture good quality data is that next frontier that we just are basically pioneering, getting people to be more thoughtful, and when they capture that recognition, putting the right specificity in there again so you can mine it to better understand who's living your core values, what are the behaviors they're showing up with, how can that help HR and managers make better decisions.
Does anyone have any other tools they've been using or building internally you want to share?
So Gemini, as I mentioned, is the one that at least we're experimenting with now because everybody now has access. But I do feel I have a healthy amount of skepticism just in general. I mean, this is changing every day, right? We see different articles about what's going on with AI every day. But looking for the downsides or looking for the errors and essentially having to check these models all the time, I think is just part of our day-to-day. It has to be part of our day, no matter what tool you're using. So I don't know which ones are better than others. I think there's probably pros and cons to every single tool or language model that's out there. And so right now, I think the experimentation, we're using it, we're far along in using it, but there's definitely a lot of experimentation to figure out how far can we push it and where can we kind of let go and not check as thoroughly. Like, for example, I'll just give one example. In using something like a Gemini for analyzing comments, right, in a survey, we do see that in certain tools or certain models, the comments are really, I would say, mostly around, or at least the summaries around the first 100 comments out of like 5,000, 10,000. This is what the model's doing, right? And this is actually something that we would have hired interns to do before. Like, I can have an intern read 100 comments and give me a summary. I want the 10,000. So you have to keep iterating on the prompt in order to get it to look at more and more comments. So there's just a lot of, I don't know, let's say risks involved if you just kind of give it a task and let it go. Like, you have to check the work still, just like you would with an intern. And so there's a tool that we're using. It's definitely helping, but I still feel like there's a lot of work that we have to do right at the same time.
Yeah. Shifting now to talk a little about the impacts on you personally, like looking at your day-to-day, is there a task AI is completely transformed for you, or an area where you thought it would be really helpful, but maybe it fell short and didn't deliver what you expected? I don't know, Anita, maybe do you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, I mean, if we want to get really personal, I used AI last night to say, like, I have these things in my kitchen. I need to make dinner for a toddler. And, it was fine. It was helpful, like an extension of Google. And I thought that was really interesting because some people are using it as an extension to Google, some people are using it as an extension to medical advice, and some people are using it as an extension to hiring individuals. And I just share that example of like cooking in my kitchen to like medical advice as a spectrum because there is kind of a possibility for a lot of those errors and a lot of that testing to happen. I'm still not 100% bought in with using it beyond the extension of Google unless it is complemented by another set of AI tools that's been trained appropriately. So throwing things into Perplexity and saying, give me this, and then copy pasting it, just not as clean and valid as it needs to be. So I haven't gotten there from a work perspective. But from a work perspective, I've used it a lot as like water cooler, right? Like when we used to be in the office 5 days a week, we're not, but when we used to, well, if you had a business issue, you should talk to colleagues about it from a water cooler issue. So I kind of always have it up on a monitor to water cooler with, like, I'm thinking this, can you tell me what the thinking is? And just like a colleague you'd meet at the coffee machine, sometimes you take them seriously and sometimes you're like, I'm definitely not gonna do that. And so just having that discerning lens to it, I think, is really important.
I love using water cooler as a verb. This is great. Let's start doing that.
It was coined here at From Day One.
Yeah, for me, I would say if you've ever had to write that rage email in response to somebody else, I am one of those people. I love Copilot because it helps check my tone. You're like, let me just change that language a little bit and send it off, right? To talk about a personal way of using it. So for us at Media Brands, what we've actually bought a number of models and put guardrails around them, right? So we're not necessarily allowed to go out and put something in Gemini or use ChatGPT or anything like that, partly because we don't want employees putting sensitive client information into those tools. We absolutely do not want that. So we've built something internally that's black box. Of course, we partner and we purchase the models themselves that run as engines under that, but that's the way it's been done. And it's available to everyone within the organization, all the way from people who are client-facing, doing creative work, or setting up a media plan, supporting that, all the way to someone in HR being able to use it. Within People Analytics, similar to what you all are doing at Colgate, we use it very often for analyzing text. So an example we recently did is we were doing a job analysis for a critical role in the organization. We went through a series of interviews. Previously, it would have been an intern or an entry-level person sitting there and coding all of that. We recorded it, took the raw transcripts, dumped it in the model, and it generated a profile, a job description profile for this role. But of course, same thing. It got us maybe 75% there, and then we had to take it the rest of the way and tweak language, focus on things. There were certain contexts that obviously it didn't get that we were able to incorporate. So it's not like it's any big drastic project. A lot of these things are very small instances where we're injecting the use of AI. That's just getting a little bit more efficiency, right? So that job analysis probably would have taken us 2 months to get through. We were able to get it done in like a week. Not counting the interviews and people's schedules, but that's the separate thing.
For me and my team, I think that the biggest use that we're getting in terms of leverage on time is we've trained a custom GPT on all of our content, all of our case studies, and all of our kind of materials, and done a pretty good job of training it on voice and tone as well. And with that, for a marketing organization, our content creation kind of speed has gone up really exponentially. And I think that with that, we can tailor content to more audiences and be a lot more appropriate to the audiences that we're talking to. Because at this point, I think it probably gets us 95% of the way there. And so it's really just that last polish that it needs at this point.
Something I've already heard a bit of, even from those of you who are far along in your AI journeys, is a little bit of wariness. Of course, attitudes toward AI differ across every company and different industries. Catherine, I know this is something you've seen since you work in technical hiring across all different industries. They might have different risk appetites. So how should companies think about their own tolerance for risk with AI, and what are the risks of moving too fast or too slow?
Yeah, I think that AI is incredibly powerful for a lot of things. Pattern recognition, automation, driving scale, and really helping to get those efficiencies that we were talking about. But particularly in HR, there are a lot of things that it can't do that are so critical to this function. So things like, you know, contextual nuance and understanding, you know, the human aspect of things is just something that you are never going to be able to train an LLM on. And whether it is, you know, engineers coding based on requirements, or it is, you know, making hiring and firing decisions, there's really just no kind of stand-in for the human touch and the human element associated with that. And I think that, you know, one of the risks associated with, you know, relying on these models is that inherent risk under it of what if the data that you gave it is bad? And so if you are doing performance reviews and you have data that you have used historically based on the performance of your organization, and you know, you are using that to then review the performance of existing employees. One of the biggest risks that I see there is that there is bias built into that data. And now you are training a model based on that bias, which can then skew further and further with that bias. And so human aspects of what we do every day as leaders and of HR, I think is really critical. And to have that eye for bias is one of the things that we need to keep an eye on.
Yeah, I would agree with that. I think, you know, when you think about the performance process and how that is typically driven, you know, in an annual cycle, and it's often fraught with that bias of what do I remember recently from that, you know, that performance that I noticed, and then how that's potentially using a 360, and then more bias creeps in with people saying, okay, well, there's a limited number of fives if you're on a 5-point scale, and do I really want to give my colleague that 5 and at the detriment of myself? And so you're not really getting the full picture inherently in that process. And as an organization, we actually are trying to help mitigate those blind spots and those biases with crowdsourced performance reviews that are happening all the time through recognition. Those are the moments that when you aggregate them up, it can sort of help that blind spot, and you can pull that information into your performance cycle. And so we're definitely seeing that. That's an important aspect, and I agree that you need to absolutely be cognizant of that human element to make sure what insights you're getting are, you know, they're not a hallucination, they're not something that's incorrect, and that they're actual you know, insights and patterns that can help you versus, you know, potentially create legal risk.
Yep.
Okay. Well, staying on the topic of the risks, you know, some of you have already mentioned bias and blind spots. We know AI is still new, it's far from perfect. It should really be explored and implemented, you know, with some care. So what kinds of conversations are you all having about policies and guardrails when it comes to how to use AI in HR?
Yeah, I can go. So for us, when we launched our internal AI product, there are a few things right out the gate. You cannot put compensation data in there. Please do not. You cannot put employee personal identification data in there either. We, as people analytics, went the step of saying no raw employee data goes in there other than text that has been de-anonymized, right, with no identifying info. Anything else cannot be put into the model. Now, yes, we've been encouraging people to use our AI tools to help them analyze people data, but it has to be summarized. And as an example, if you wanted to look at turnover trends, right, you could put in a table with turnover numbers in there, maybe across a series of months or a series of years, and get support in analyzing that. And we found it's helpful in particular for HRBPs who aren't necessarily doing this day in, day out, to just get a little bit of a boost in helping them understand what they might be looking at. What they cannot do is take a roster and put it in there of these people left voluntarily and these people left involuntarily and try to get some kind of analysis. So that was one thing that we put out the gate, just to kind of help mitigate some of that. And then just the use of AI in certain decisions. So I think you were already hinting at it, right? You can't use it to make, obviously, compensation decisions. You can't use it to help you make decisions about hiring, firing. Those are basics that anybody would be like, yeah, absolutely not. You have to do that as a human and a manager as part of your job. You can't
I don't know, I live in Silicon Valley.
Right?
There are people doing it.
And so those are some of the guardrails. Now, there are instances where we are pushing the limit a little bit. So you mentioned performance, and that reminded me. At the end of last year, when we ran our performance process, one of the things we did do in the tool was turn on some of the AI functionality. And it was meant to help managers actually write the review. So what a manager had to do was go in, you put in your bullets and whatever your person's strengths and their opportunities, and then there would be a little prompt saying, hey, here are some suggestions to help clarify what you said for your employee. Do you want to incorporate these? Right, so it was just kind of helping tweak the way people are writing the reviews, but it still started with the manager having to go in and put some of the review content in there.
I would say we're doing a lot of things very similar. There were a lot of guardrails, a lot of course, risk aversion, right? Trying to figure out what can we do, but where do we stop? We may have over-rotated a little bit on that just because then people are like, well, what can I do, right? So that's a risk. And so I think now we're trying to encourage a behavior shift, right? So it's not just a tech deployment or a tool. How do you shift your behavior every day to use those nudges? So for example, we also had something similar, not in performance reviews, but in your objective planning and goal planning. We incorporated AI to help you create those objectives and goals. And so can we do that more and more and more, almost from a positive reinforcement perspective? Because I think in the beginning, there's just so much potential risk that you end up cutting people off, right, and then they don't know what to do. So how can we, use positive psychology, really, right, to tell people, okay, so instead of telling people what not to do, let's say, here's where you're going to use it, here's where it's going to save time, and really focus the communications on the nudges for where to go. But essentially, it's a helping with busy work and time saving, and it's not a miracle, I would say, at this stage.
If I can add, there's a huge kind of security risk with the guidelines and policies because everyone as an individual also has access to Perplexity or Gemini or whatever on their private browser. And so what we're seeing in the market is the guidelines need to be structured in such a way that they're encouraged to be used, but not so tight that what I call the black market of AI is being used on your personal device to basically get what you wanted but couldn't use in the policy space. And there's a really kind of art and science behind that because you actually don't want people to then go into personal devices to do things from a security play. And so how do you encourage it while making sure there's guidelines, while making sure everything's on the computer, on the company's cloud? Really way harder to do in practice, I guess is what I'm trying to say.
Maybe I'll build off of what I heard from Anita and Courtney. I think there's something to be sort of warned about or cautious about when it comes to using AI to actually write a manager's summary on a performance review or even in the recognition space when you're capturing a personal moment that you noticed. We originally were thinking about creating some sort of a writer's block tool, but then we kind of backed away from that as a company because we knew that on the back end, if you were going to do all sorts of generative AI queries of your data set, if the recognition message was written by AI, 50% or more, those descriptors, those adjectives, those things might not be actual, behaviors that are truly going to then map to a skills profile. And so there is an opportunity to really think through, do we want that to be more of an AI tool, micro-coaching to say, keep going, almost like you're creating a password on a website and it's like you don't have enough uppercase, lowercase symbols, right? And it's a little progress bar of keep building into it, lean into that, you're almost there. That's what we've kind of landed on as opposed to coaching or supplying text for managers or people leaders or nominators, anyone really, to capture that heartfelt. Here's what I noticed, here's the behaviors, here's how it impacted the company, me personally. If that's more heartfelt and coming from what they saw and what they observed, it's more valuable on the back end when you're mining for people that might be a good mentor out of the Boston office, if it's actually people's words that are being mined.
It's like a handwritten note, you know that you didn't
That's right.
get help. So it's even more valuable.
It's more valuable.
A handwritten note now.
zooming in on the talent acquisition side of it, I know AI has the potential to make these processes so much more efficient for you all, but I already know job seekers are feeling wary of how AI could make the application and interviewing process and whole job process maybe impersonal or cold. So how can talent acquisition professionals reap the benefits of AI while ensuring it's still a good and fair experience for the candidates? Let's see. Annalyn, maybe could you start us? Do you have any thoughts on that one?
Yeah, your question reminded me of something. I was chatting with someone recently, and they were talking about their process, and in there they had a checkbox that said, are you okay with your application being analyzed by AI, or would you prefer a human looking at it? And I just thought, looking at the way they were setting it up, I thought, oh, that's actually really helpful, because candidates are totally wary of this, right? Like the fact that we've removed humans from the process so much that everything is just going into a black box. I think for us, talent acquisition, quite frankly, is one of the areas where we're probably the slowest in terms of leveraging AI and what it can do. I think part of it is just because talent acquisition as a function has been one with the volumes of hiring that we have and the cadence of our business, right? It's like you win a client, you have to ramp up so quickly, you lose a client, and you have to ramp down very quickly. Just that has led to a talent acquisition function that's very volatile. So for us, trying to introduce AI into that, and when you think about the skill sets that an individual really needs to leverage AI effectively, just if you think about how you write a prompt, right? Like you need, to me, it felt like we needed a little bit more sophistication within our talent acquisition function to really quite frankly, I'm being honest here, right? To really effectively be able to leverage AI within that space. So I'm gonna punt that question to the rest of them.
No, I mean, for us, there's a lot of use of it for kind of the administration, but the employee experience and the recruiter experience and the candidate experience, and in general, if I can make a broad statement, experiences in general, human experiences, are just so elevated now because of AI, right? The ability to go to a restaurant, engage with someone in person, all of that, I mean, that's the next booming industry as it relates to where I would invest in kind of thinking about where to do this. So if you work backward, the AI using for the administration is really great, for the experience is really poor. And in fact, I think it's like 59% of candidates who will reject an offer that they've gotten if the experience of getting the offer was bad. I mean, that is a crazy number considering how much money is put into getting the candidate the offer. So the consumer and the candidate is just becoming so much more sophisticated, whether they're buying a hot dog or whether they're deciding on a job. And so elevating the role of experience, I think, is a key part of the talent acquisition landscape.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. And when you think about what AI is doing to the talent acquisition kind of pipeline, it's disrupting both sides. So on the candidate side, you're seeing resumes that are 100% tied, 100% matches to the job descriptions because candidates are using AI to customize their resume to make sure that they are going to make it through your ATS. Or they are using tools that are sending their resume to every single applicable job and tailoring it to. And so then you have this volume problem where you've got so many resumes coming in that there's no possible way that any talent acquisition person can manage it. And so you almost have to have AI to figure out what is appropriate and what isn't in order to cull through all of those resumes in order to drive that really good candidate experience. Because otherwise, you're just gonna send out blanket rejections and never actually look at these resumes, which is absolutely kind of the worst outcome from a candidate experience perspective and getting the best kind of candidates in the door into your actual hiring managers. And so putting AI tools in can actually help to improve candidate experience if used in the right way. And I think that that's a really kind of big opportunity right now, that we're looking at from a technical hiring perspective, but that needs to be looked at across kind of all of your functional areas.
Yeah, that is such a good point about how it's coming from both sides, and leads me to wonder, with AI being such a driver of the conversation, pressure to adopt AI, how can HR and talent acquisition folks avoid pitfalls of over-relying on AI, while navigating these tricky waters, bringing along the candidates and their teams who maybe are fearful of it? I don't know, Omar, do you want to start?
Over-reliance
Haven't heard from you
on
in a
AI?
bit.
I mean, I think we kind of touched on a little bit of that with just making sure there's that human element. I would almost offer the flip side of that, which is if you are looking at external talent and you're using AI, that's one thing, but what about all that internal talent? What about leveraging your data on your people, and if it's valid and reliable data that you can then say, here's a team, here's their skills profile as determined by all these moments that we're capturing in a platform around their day-to-day experience and how they're showing up, going above and beyond. Help me look across the business to find people that are a good fit with that team, with that skills profile. And that's something that our customers are actually starting to leverage with AI and that talent acquisition kind of lens, but looking within. So it's kind of a new frontier, but it's quite exciting.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, just to piggyback on that, I'm sure some of you have more of a skills-based organization than you've had in the past. Do you not? Or at least it's been discussed a ton. And so using, yes, we can all giggle, or tasks, right? Because that's the newer part of skills, or tasks is a bunch of skills within the task. But I love that because looking at, we're using it, let's say, or we would be using skills to match people with jobs. That's what we're trying to do, right? External and internal, but to teams. That was the difference that I heard you say. That's super interesting. How can we create teams that are made up of maybe different and complementary skill sets or adjacent skill sets and try to get people to learn from each other, right? There's lots of use cases for that type of matching and using AI. Yeah, I like that.
Yeah. So I think you touched on this a little bit. AI is changing not just how we work, what work looks like, what roles and teams look like. How have you had to rethink any job roles or team structures? And just what has that looked like adopting to AI, within your HR organizations?
So that one I can start with. 'Cause
Yeah.
We've talked a lot about that one. And the main reason being is, if there's anyone in here who is part of the media and marketing world, there's a ton of talk about how AI, it's everywhere, but particularly for media and marketing, there's a ton of talk about how AI is going to disrupt that industry just because of the impact, and you hinted at it, just because of the impact it has on things like creating content. If you think about all of the data that we sit on from an ad tech perspective, just identifying, how you're going to target your audiences, what that plan is going to look like, all of that can be disrupted and done by AI and done much faster than having a person do it currently, which means a lot of those jobs, particularly entry-level jobs, over time are going to go away, right? And so what we've started thinking about is, okay, if that is going to be the case, what does the new entry level look like for this industry? And is it going to be at a higher level? So are you now saying our managers are going to be our entry level? Well, what does that experience even look like to get there, right? Because they're no longer going to be the opportunities for those people. So now you have to start thinking, well, do we need to go further downstream so that we're getting to people as they're coming through training programs or coming through college? In some cases, they're no longer going to come through college. So is that where we need to start thinking about changing what that training would look like to ensure that they're getting those skills there versus on-the-job experience, because that entry-level role is going to change? And then you think about, okay, as AI is creating new jobs, something, again, we were talking about just writing prompt or some of the work that you all are doing at Colgate-Palmolive. Now, those are jobs, in our case, we're not even aware that it's going to be needed in the future. How do you even put that on your resource planning for the next 12 months, right? If you don't even know what is going to be needed.
Absolutely. And so with engineering hires, the same question about, are there not going to be entry-level media buyers in the future? The same questions are being asked as, are there no longer entry-level engineers? And I think that's the wrong question. It is, what is the skill set that you need to be an entry-level engineer? And I think it goes back to the things that we were talking about that AI can and cannot do. And I think it's that understanding of nuance and being able to understand requirements. Given perfect requirements, AI can return a perfect code, but there is no such thing as a perfect requirement, and there is no such thing as a perfect team. And so that understanding of nuance and kind of human interaction and the ability to interpret requirements and to know that Joe on this team's brain will explode if you return a certain type of logic or code is something that, your LLM can't do. And I think the same thing probably applies to entry-level media buyers, which is that given perfect information, you can go and make my media buys, through an LLM, but I have very specific nuances of me as a client that, you can't just put into an LLM. And so I think we're gonna have to train people to be less black and white and more adaptive. And that those nuances and understanding of how to adapt and how to then take things and tweak the code or tweak the media buys based on the reality of the humans is gonna be a skill that we have to teach our entry-level people.
So we have just a few minutes left. I want to close on a question I'd love to hear from each of you, which is, just addressing with how quickly AI is moving. It can be a little overwhelming. The pace of it, understanding how it's affecting your organization and those actionable steps. So if you had to give one piece of advice to HR professionals, what they should focus on, what's the most important thing right now, what would that be? Maybe we could just start with you and then come down the line.
Sorry. Yeah. Okay. I think we have to all, unfortunately, go back to school, but in our minds, so not physically. Maybe just be a student, because the only way to learn this is actually sitting in a program, right, and learning it either yourself, right, experimenting, testing, and learning, but you have to set aside that time to get your degree. And it's changing every day, so I don't know that you want to go down the rabbit hole for 8 hours, but continuing to follow the trends and testing and learning and looking at, like you said, the entry level, I think is such an interesting conundrum because the entry level, maybe it's not going to be the manager level, but it's how does the entry level, how is it covered by AI, and then what is that new entry level, early in career person doing with that as a partner? So it's just a constant partnership. So if we're thinking of it that way for entry level, how is it going to be like that for me? How is my job and my team's jobs, how are they going to be partnering with the AI? So I think it's all of us need to be students.
I love that. I'm gonna add to it instead of, I would say 2 components. One is the humility of where we are in our journey is really important. It was interesting, we all were like, our organizations are doing great. And then if you look at the stats, actually 97% of leaders say they wanna invest in AI, but 1% of organizations have actually reached what is objectively AI maturity for their relative organization. So I think there should be like a ubiquitous humility in the fact that we are still in the infancy of this whole situation. And then the second is the change management associated with this. We talked about requirements and not knowing them or the resources 6 months from now. This landscape is changing so quickly that our ability to be agile and our ability to kind of be change resilient is a muscle that a lot of us use during massive change implementations or massive life transitions, but not on a weekly basis. And I think we need to bring that tricep back out and bring those dumbbells back out because that's gonna be really critical in the next couple of months and years.
Yeah. So I'm gonna try to add to what both of you all said as well. And I think it's, as HR professionals, not losing sight of the people in this, because what we're starting to see is that as things evolve and accelerate, the business is seeing this as an opportunity to cut costs and save money. And that is, as we see more of these changes, that knee-jerk reaction is starting to accelerate. And it is really putting at risk, leaving so many people behind with that urgency to get efficiency and improve productivity and cut costs and all of these things. And I think as HR professionals, more so, it feels more so now than ever. And maybe they went through this with the Industrial Revolution, right? I don't know. I wasn't there. But more so now than ever, I think as HR professionals, it's important for us that when we are in the rooms, when these conversations are happening, that we are able to kind of help bring in that context into those conversations so that we're not losing sight of people and the impact of people that this is having as we all go on this journey.
I love that. I think everything that's been said so far, I would agree, and maybe just to add as an HR professional thinking about AI, the big takeaway for me to leave you with is think about that underlying data set. What are you training your AI on? What are you asking of your AI? We've sort of evolved from the days of the Dewey Decimal System and going to a library, and then there was once that computer that you could type in keyword searches and then tell you where to go in the library to find the books, and then Google came about and we could easily find all the world's information, and now we're in this age of AI where we can have conversations and kind of steer the AI towards better sources if we're not happy with the sources they're using, or better, tighter answers because they're a little bit off track. So it's just a skill, it's a muscle. I think we'll all get there with time and effort, just like we've gotten through all those other phases of democratizing information and accessing that. And of course, the businesses will want to try to use that as a way to knee-jerk trim workforces, but we'll have to do it gradually and slowly. And I think it's important to take all of that into account with a perspective of this is a journey and it's a muscle and it'll take time, but it's important to understand how AI works so you can use it to your advantage.
I think we've talked quite a bit about ourselves and holding ourselves accountable to learning and to being flexible, but I think it's also critical that when we think about our hiring processes as well as training and enabling our teams, that we're keeping those same things in mind, and that we are hiring for people who are intellectually curious and who are willing to and humble enough to know what they need to learn, and who have that kind of desire and urge to continue to learn, and that those are things that we're going to need to train on as well as make sure that we're hiring for.
Great. All right. Thank you so much for your perspectives and your insights. I hope that was helpful for you all, and we're all set. Thank you.